Let's jump right into this explainer and honestly dismantle a massive myth right off the bat. A lot of us think human memory works like this perfect little video camera, just passively recording and replaying the events of our lives, right? Well, as we'll see by looking at the classic Atkinson-Shiffrin multi-store model and the actual physical neurochemistry of the brain, memory is incredibly dynamic. It's a highly active, reconstructive process. Our brains are constantly filtering, sorting, and sometimes even completely fabricating the world around us.
So here's our agenda for this architectural tour of the mind. First up, the memory pipeline. Second, the different types of memory. Third, the step-by-step process of how we actually remember. Fourth, we'll look at the brain's biological hardware. And finally, we'll tackle exactly why we forget.
Okay, Section 1, the memory pipeline and how data enters. Think of this as the loading dock for human consciousness.
So the very first stage of memory, the sensory register, is incredibly fleeting. Blink and you miss it. It holds massive amounts of raw data just long enough for our brain to decide what actually matters. Visual, or iconic memory, lasts anywhere from a mere 200 milliseconds up to maybe 1 second. Auditory, or echoic memory, echoes in the mind for about 2 to 5 seconds. It essentially acts as this massive selective filter. If the data isn't captured by your attention immediately, boom, it decays instantly.
Now, if information actually survives that sensory filter, it moves into short-term, or working memory. Badley and Hitch brilliantly conceptualize this as your mental workbench. You've got a central executive directing your attention, and it's assisted by a visuospatial scratchpad for images and a phonological loop for verbal data. But here's the catch. Without active rehearsal, this workbench only holds about 6 or 7 items for roughly 15 to 30 seconds. Whether that data sticks depends heavily on the levels of processing. Shallow processing means you'll probably lose it, but deep semantic processing, that ensures the info sticks and moves forward into long-term storage.
Which brings us to Section 2, types of memory, or our long-term storage.
Our vast reservoir of long-term memory is actually quite elegantly divided. The really crucial split here is between declarative and non-declarative memory. Declarative, or explicit memory, is exactly what it sounds like, stuff you can consciously declare or talk about. Non-declarative, or implicit memory, involves automatic physical skills, like swimming or typing. What's truly amazing about this is the concept of system independence. Your body can implicitly remember how to ride a bike completely independently of your conscious mind actively recalling those painful childhood lessons.
Zooming in on that conscious declarative memory, we can split things up even further. Semantic memory is basically the pure storage of abstract facts, totally devoid of time or place. Like knowing the capital of Chad, or that a dog has 4 legs. Episodic memory, on the other hand, covers specific, personally experienced autobiographical events. So, remembering the exact weather on your wedding day? That relies entirely on your episodic memory.
Now, I want you to think for a second about a highly emotional, historic event. Take the 9/11 terrorist attacks, for instance. If you're old enough to remember it, you likely feel you remember it perfectly, right? You know exactly where you were, who you were with, and exactly how you felt.
Well, this brilliantly illustrates what we call flashbulb memories. Driven by intense emotion, they feel like perfect, permanent, eidetic imagery. But here is the absolute wildest part. They aren't perfect. Decades of research actually show that these memories lose precision and accuracy over the years, with the greatest loss occurring in the very first year. So yes, even our most vivid, deeply held memories are subject to reconstruction.
Moving on to Section 3, how we remember, and the actual retrieval process.
Remembering is actually a multi-stage, highly active process. First up is registration, or encoding the new data. Next is retention, where we maintain it through maintenance or elaborative rehearsal. Then, crucially, the brain has to go through consolidation to permanently stabilize this neural trace. Finally, we get to retrieval, which takes 2 forms, recall and recognition. Recall is an effortful search, like pulling the word Paris out of thin air when asked the capital of France. Recognition is just familiarity-based. If I ask, is it Paris or Lyon, the stimulus itself triggers that awareness.
Let's dive into Section 4, the brain's hardware, and look at where memory actually lives.
All this cognitive architecture maps directly onto localized brain regions in neurochemistry. The medial temporal lobe, which contains the hippocampus, is basically the core engine for explicit facts and consolidation. Interestingly, lesions here can permanently destroy the ability to form new long-term explicit memories while leaving short-term capacity totally intact. Then we have the subcortical network, the basal ganglia, cerebellum, and amygdala, handling our implicit skills and emotional processing independently. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex acts as the executive manager. Your dorsolateral PFC actively manipulates data using synchronized gamma band electrical oscillations, while the ventrolateral PFC simply maintains it. And at the cellular level, this is all driven by long-term potentiation, the literal, persistent strengthening of synapses, and relies heavily on acetylcholine, which is the primary neurotransmitter implicated in Alzheimer's disease.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Why We Forget, Interference and Decay. You see, forgetting isn't always just a failure of storage. It's often a totally normative process of interference. We have proactive interference, where your pre-existing knowledge blocks new learning. For example, your prior fluency in Spanish might actually hinder your ability to recall new German vocabulary. Conversely, retroactive interference happens when new learning disrupts the old. Learning that brand new German vocabulary might retroactively make you forget the Spanish you already knew. The files aren't gone. They're just confusing each other.
And then there are retrieval failures, like that incredibly frustrating tip-of-the-tongue feeling. Science formally calls this temporary inability to remember a proper noun lithophalangia. What's fascinating here is that your brain often retrieves sound-alikes or meaning-alikes while you're struggling. This beautifully proves that the data isn't permanently erased. Rather, our long-term memory is structured in deeply interconnected, logical, semantic networks that just need the exact right retrieval cue.
Now, forgetting can also be active and physiological. Beyond Freudian repression or using our prefrontal cortex for deliberate, directed forgetting, we have the neurogenic hypothesis. Get this, high levels of neurogenesis, which is the birth of new neurons during childhood, actually replace old synaptic connections, literally structurally inducing childhood amnesia. Furthermore, memory is highly sensitive to our physiological state. Just a single night of sleep deprivation can cause severe working memory deficits. On the flip side, deep sleep provides a pristine environment, totally free from environmental interference that directly facilitates consolidation.
Ultimately, the biggest thing you should take away from this explainer is that memory is not a literal videotape. It is an active, reconstructive process. It's a highly subjective interpretation of reality shaped by our emotions, our attention, and our neurochemistry. So, knowing just how incredibly fluid and malleable this biological system truly is, we always have to ask ourselves, when we look back in our lives, how much of our past is absolute objective fact, and how much is simply a masterfully constructed story?